welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Money with Wendy Silebi. This is the final episode of the series that we've been doing on credit. And just to recap, we started with a series where we had a conversation with the then Ombudsman of Consumer Good Services. That was episode 10. Then we followed it up with a discussion with the CEO of TransUnion, where we were talking about all things credit bureaus and financial inclusion. That was episode 11. And then we had an interview with the National Credit Regulator, where we really spoke about debt review and what the work of the NCR is. That was episode 13. And before we know it, we've just had another episode where we are talking credit with a credit manager. And now, to close off the whole credit series, I'm excited to be here in the offices of the Credit Ombud, and I'm having a conversation with Avitha Nofal. She's the head of dispute resolution, contact center, and Credit Ombudsman Council Secretariat. Well, welcome, Avitha.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, I do know that I was very short in my introduction. There's probably more things that you do here. So if you can just give a little bit more of the role that you play here at the Credit Ombuds.
Thanks, Wendy. So with dispute resolution, I head up that department. So within the department, there's a few legal advisors, there's case managers that would deal with the actual resolution of disputes as received from consumers. Then we would deal with, in addition to those, the contact center. So I would head up that team of the contact center agents. Very important role as a contact center because they are the first voices and ears for that consumer that's calling the Credit Ombud office. In addition, I assist and I head up the PR department. We have a wonderful lady, Kabelo Teme, who deals with communications. And then I'm also the council secretariat for the Credit Ombud Council.
Wow, that's a lot, eh? Okay, and maybe before we get into the discussion of the day around the role that the Credit Ombuds plays and so on, maybe share a little bit about who Avitha is, where you were born, how you got here, so you can share as little or more. Depends on you. You're welcome to just share.
So I grew up in Natal, a very loving family. I have a number of siblings and we fought like crazy. I moved to Johannesburg after my studies were completed and I joined the then Estate Agency Affairs Board as a legal officer, doing case presenting, doing prosecutions across the country against estate agents. Then I moved on thereafter to a firm of attorneys where I was a senior associate. And after having my third baby, I decided that I wanted to be a homemaker. So I stayed home for 2 years with my last child. And then I realized there's only so much communication that you can deal with. Yeah. So I concertedly looked for something that I felt I didn't know, and I did not know credit. So I was eager to find myself in a space where I could add value, but also that value could be within me as well. Somebody that did not understand credit would be able to appreciate it. So I've now been with the Credit Ombud office for just over 10 years. Wow. It is a passion. I love the work that I do at the Credit Ombud office. There is more coming in the new year with an amalgamation between the Credit Ombud, the Banking Ombud, the Short-Term Insurance Ombud, and the Long-Term Insurance Ombud.
Oh my goodness. Oh, you're all coming under one umbrella.
Correct.
Okay. And then, from just your introduction, I pick up that you did law.
Yes.
And now you've pivoted into the credit space. And I think that's something that's encouraging for someone that's probably feeling that they've been doing one role for a long time. What your career path has done is to pivot into something new that has become a passion for you. And I think if someone is watching us, they're feeling stuck wherever they are, it's never too late to find something that you truly love. And when you do it, when it's a passion, you don't work. Because it's something that really comes from the heart, that you do. So
couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let's just start here by talking about your definition of what credit is. Because I think it's important that we always define it, and it's always different definitions.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So with credit, let's go one step backwards.
Mm-hmm.
There's credit. There's cash.
Mm-hmm.
And you've heard the words, cash is king.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, fine, cash is king. But we're living in a society that allows for credit to be used favorably. So what is credit? Credit is the ability that you as a consumer would have to purchase an item that you would not normally or ordinarily have purchased, but understand that it is at a cost. Whereas cash, you purchase an item, you receive the item, you've tendered payment, end of the transaction. With a credit agreement, however, you've purchased the item, you get possession of the item, but you have to pay back the price of the item in addition to that, for the fact that the provider that has allowed you to purchase the item on credit, there must be a benefit. It would inevitably be a business that they are dealing with. Yeah. So that credit agreement would come at a cost. That cost would entail interest, it would entail service fees, and any other sort of charges. Sure. So that distinction must be very clearly made. With credit, you would pay over a period of time. It could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, it could be an extended period up to 60 months, as opposed to cash where you would purchase and pay immediately.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'd agree with me when I say that a credit agreement is a legal agreement that you enter into. And actually the person that provides you with the credit does so based on trust. So it's important that as a consumer, I must maintain the trust relationship with whoever has extended me the credit.
So quite rightly so, credit agreement is a legal document, and very importantly, it provides for certain obligations and certain rights for both parties, for the consumer as well as that credit provider who has extended the credit to that consumer. Right. Provided as a consumer, I have abided by the terms and conditions, and equally so as a credit provider, they have abided by those terms and conditions. Then all's well. In a romantic world, a vanilla product, you have a credit agreement, and as a consumer, I've abided by the terms of that agreement. I've made payment in terms of the agreement again, per the agreement. So it all depends on your ability to make that payment based on that agreement that you've signed up for.
Yeah. But Avitha, if you look at those terms and conditions, it's a long, sometimes it's 3 pages long, written in small writing. And then you kind of like, they give you these terms and conditions and they say you must sign. Most times we don't read the terms and conditions. It's only when there's a dispute that you go back, or somebody then voices over to say, hey, you signed, and this is what was in the terms and conditions. And maybe let's just talk about, or maybe just advise our consumers the importance of going through those terms and conditions and understanding what's in there, irrespective of how long or how small they could be.
As an attorney, one would expect that having had the legal knowledge and the backing of your experience, I would look at every single agreement, its fine print, and I would make a concerted decision based on the fine print. I can tell you safely, it does not happen. I will not look at every little last word in those terms and conditions. So I can imagine the man on the street who's been provided a contract and told, read and sign that you understand these terms and conditions. So there's a bigger ploy in this entire scenario, and that is financial education, financial literacy. It's easy enough to say as a credit provider that here's your contract, sign the agreement. As a consumer, I want that credit. I don't care what's written in on that fine print.
I just sign.
And therefore, your point about the only time it would make sense to me as a consumer is if I now have a dispute. I've raised a dispute, and the credit provider, for one or other reason, has reneged on any sort of suggestion that I've made or queries that I have raised with them. They will refer you to the contract.
Yeah.
And there's something in a law called caveat scripto. Beware of what you've signed. Beware of those terms and conditions. But we know that for the man on the street, and for me, it's not just that simple. There are those obligations, there are those rights that I may have and I need to abide by. But also there's that financial inclusion that I think that our society is currently missing. And this is why it becomes so imperative that financial literacy should be a life skill. A life skill that kids learn from the time they're kindergarten and right through in life.
Yeah, no, that's good, because I don't like reading long documents. Anybody, even if it's a WhatsApp message, when it comes in, where it says learn or read more, I'll read tomorrow, because I just can't handle these long messages. So I really watch your point resonates with me, that financial literacy should be a life skill. And there are many strides that are being done now, from the banking association's point of view, where they now have what they call, it started off as Teach Children to Save campaign, but now it's called Star Saver, where at least they go into the schools to teach, from grade 9, I think they teach them basic financial literacy. But I think there are more opportunities of extending into credit and into other, so that by the time they come into the mainstream economy, they already have an idea. When we grew up, we didn't know anything about budgeting or signing contracts. The first contract I signed literally was when I started work, fresh from school. And as you've said, I didn't even read anything in that thing. I was so afraid that if I ask them questions, they'll think I'm not wise, and then they'll tear the thing up and I've lost my job. So I just looked at it and I was busy signing. I don't even know what I was signing, Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're quite right. There's huge strides towards financial literacy and education. And you would have noticed that the National Treasury have been very instrumental in bringing financial inclusion to South Africa by virtue of their Money Smart Week South Africa.
Yes.
Their committee, the National Consumer Education, the NCFEC committee. So there are huge strides going in that direction, but I do maintain that this should not be limited to grade 9 onwards, but really from grassroots level.
Grassroots, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, no. Money Smart Week, I've participated a lot in that. I was heading up the consumer financial education at the bank that I was working
That's
for.
very interesting. Also, a quick point to note that with the treating customers fairly principle, there's an obligation on any agent representing a credit provider when a consumer is signing an agreement to make the consumer understand what those terms and conditions of that agreement are. And then, there places an obligation on that consumer. Yes, we understand that they want the credit and they will sign on the dotted line, but there is an obligation on them. Understand it. And if you don't want to read the reams of paper that talk to these minute wording on the terms and conditions, ask questions. Speak with the credit provider. And if the credit provider is unable to assist, take away the document and get someone else to look at it. Contact the credit ombudsman. We would be able to direct them.
Awesome. That's great. Okay. So maybe let's talk about this office, the credit ombuds. What is the role of the credit ombuds, and how does your role benefit us? Because I'm also a consumer, especially when it comes to credit.
Absolutely. Interesting point you make that you're also a consumer. Equally so, I'm employed at the Credit Ombud, but I'm a consumer too. So the Credit Ombud office was established to deal with initially credit information disputes. Now, what does credit information mean? It means that if I have signed a credit agreement, the chances are that in that fine print, the credit provider has said that as a mechanism of ensuring that information is submitted to the credit bureau about my payment behavior on a monthly basis, they will submit information to the bureau, telling the bureau this is what Avitha is doing in terms of handling her credit agreement. Is she a good payer? Is she not a good payer? Is she skipping payments or not? So on a monthly basis, information is submitted to the credit bureau. And on the credit bureau, there's a profile for Avitha that talks to how I handle my accounts. Now, if I look at the credit bureau report and I pick up, whether it's by virtue of me going to try and purchase a vehicle or home or opening a cell phone contract for that matter, and I pick up that some information that's appearing on that credit profile is incorrect or inaccurate, I have a right in terms of the National Credit Act to challenge that information that's appearing on the bureau profile. Now, the process currently is that if the bureau profile does in fact reflect negatively in any way by virtue of the outdated information or the inaccurate information, then I will log a dispute with the credit bureau. Now, there's about 30 odd credit bureau, including resellers in the country. If I contact one of them and I advise this is what my complaint is, the bureau has 20 business days to resolve that matter.
Okay.
If they do not resolve the matter within those 20 business days, or they come back to me and they say within 5 days, we've now received credible information from the credit provider or the service provider, and based on that information, we're not removing anything from your credit profile. I'm still aggrieved because I believe that there's some inaccuracy on my profile. I would then be entitled to approach the Credit Ombud and log a complaint with the Credit Ombud for investigation. But that's just one part of the type of complaints that we deal with.
Yes.
So remember I said the office initially started with dealing with credit information. So that deals with the adverse listings on a consumer's profile.
So if you have an adverse or an adverse where they say you're a slow payer, or a judgment, now that's even hectic, and you're not in agreement with that, then you would lodge that.
Correct.
That's number one. Okay.
Very important.
Right.
Then there's the second type of complaint that we would deal with, and that would be anything relating to non-bank credit agreements. So Avitha has gone to a retailer, XYZ fashion retailers, and I have signed up for a store card. I've been purchasing each month clothing, shoes, and the like. And along the way, I find that when I look at my statement, there are additions on that statement as debits, like maybe brochures, magazines.
That I didn't sign for.
I did not sign up for it. And I've taken it through to XYZ fashion retailers. I've said to them, I didn't sign up for this, and they've done nothing. I can then approach the Credit Ombud office and ask the office to investigate the complaint.
Okay.
So, in a nutshell, credit information disputes relating to adverse listings and or we would be able to deal with non-bank credit agreement matters. Anything relating to the banks, we've entered an arrangement with the banking ombud that for credit information, where before we dealt with banking matters, we would send it through to their offices, and anything relating to your credit agreement with the bank, we would refer to the banking ombud as well.
Awesome. I was just about to ask that question because I wanted to check, okay, if I've got probably a credit card with Bank A and I'm unhappy with whatever's happening there, do I come to you or to the banking ombuds, and you've answered that. No, thank you so much.
We work very closely as well with
yeah.
the National Credit Regulators Office. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with the regulator in that in the event that a consumer approaches the Credit Ombud Office relating to a non-subscribing member of the office, our constitution doesn't let us proceed to investigate the matter.
Okay.
We would refer that consumer to the regulator directly. And likewise, in the event that the National Credit Regulator receives a complaint from a consumer relating to a credit provider that is a member, they send those complaints through to our office for investigation.
Okay, that's great. Hey, I think I like that collaborative, relationship that's there. And when I interviewed the then credit ombuds of Makhauta Mpahlela, she said there was another body that has been formed where all of you would now belong to, and so on. So I just like the collaboration that's there, that as a consumer, even if I reached out to the wrong ombud, or then I'd be referred to the right place. So, I mean, consumers can be rest assured that, their complaints will not fall by the wayside because they approached the wrong office. So, when I had a conversation with Alf from the National Credit Regulator, he made me aware that, when they investigate a complaint and they come to a conclusion, they enforce that. I just wanted to check with you. Okay, so let's step back. I have a complaint, a credit complaint. What is the process that I follow if I want to reach this office?
Certainly. Now I'm going to go one step back.
Sure.
And that is because I think it's very important for consumers to be aware of the fact that the Ombud scheme is an impartial, independent body.
Awesome.
Our purpose is to investigate disputes from consumers against the credit industry, and for the Credit Ombud Office, it would relate to non-bank credit agreement and credit information disputes. However, in the event that for any reason we finalize a dispute, and I'll talk through the process in a moment. We finalize a dispute and the consumer is dissatisfied with the outcome of the Credit Ombud's findings. That consumer is well entitled to proceed to approach the National Credit Regulator. And the reason I say that at this point is because the regulator, in addition to their regulatory powers vested in them in terms of the National Credit Act, they also are able to investigate disputes. The difference, however, is that the Credit Ombud is doing it from a facilitatory perspective, and we do not have compliance notices that get sent out. We do not have enforcement action because our purpose is impartial,
a mediator.
Correct. As opposed to the regulator who would be able to regulate the credit industry and then issue those compliance notices and enforcement action.
Yeah, I think that's so important, for consumers to know that.
Yes.
To know that if they are unhappy with your mediation process or any other ombuds process, they can always escalate to the National Credit Regulator, who then is able to, intervene and then come up with a resolution that can be enforced. Okay, like that, because I think this is what it's all about. Many of the consumers are not aware of that.
And it doesn't actually end there. If the consumer still remains dissatisfied, the consumer could request the regulator's office to issue a notice of non-compliance and then take the matter through to the National Consumer Tribunal.
Oh my God.
So there's still methods of redress for that consumer.
Yeah.
And then coming back to your question, when you as a consumer want to approach the Credit Ombud, there's various avenues by which a consumer may do this. They may approach the office physically. So we do have walk-in consumers. We have a contact center that takes calls from consumers that may have queries and or disputes relating to their credit agreements or information at the Credit Bureau. We have an email that consumers may reach us via, and of course on our website a consumer may navigate on our portal and log a dispute thereon.
Okay.
So those avenues are available. We also have an SMS number where a consumer can, free of charge, contact the Credit Ombud and say, please help. Our agents at the contact center will then liaise with the consumer and assist the consumer. Now, in all instances, we don't necessarily have the jurisdiction to deal with the matter. If a consumer approaches the office and liaises with a contact center agent and says, I have a credit agreement, but my bed that I purchased from the furniture store, which is on credit, has some default on it or defect. Then because that consumer does not have an issue with the credit agreement, the Credit Ombud will not deal with the dispute.
Okay.
However, there's a Consumer Goods and Services Ombud that will deal with the bed issue and the defect thereon. So we will not leave the consumer in the lurch. We will advise the consumer, here are details, and we actually send the email through directly to the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud based on this example. But we do the same with the other Ombud schemes as well.
I really like that there's always a solution. Because I think most of the times, a lot of the consumers, and I mean, I'm one of those people that think, I don't have the energy to be running after these people, I'll just leave it. But actually we shouldn't. We should truly follow up if we believe that, we have a dispute, and come to the Ombuds office, will be redirected to the right office.
Correct. And if it falls within the jurisdiction of the office, and let's use the example of a consumer raising prescription as the complaint on the account, and the consumer approaches us, they could do it via the complaint form, so they could submit it via email to our offices, or that consumer, when calling the Credit Ombud office, we can take that complaint telephonically. Obviously, there would be a requirement on that consumer to consent to our terms and conditions, and in the event that there's a credit adverse listing at the Bureau and the consumer wants us to investigate that aspect, we will need to obtain consent to access that consumer's credit profile, because currently the Credit Ombud has access to the credit bureaus. We are able to access the consumer specific profile to ascertain whether the consumer's complaint is in keeping with the information that's appearing on the consumer's profile at the Bureau.
No, that's great. Okay, so let's say I have a dispute and it falls squarely into this office, and I call the call center or send a WhatsApp or SMS or I email. How many days does it take for you to resolve the matter for me? Is there a timeline or?
There is a timeline of approximately 60 days.
60 days.
There are, however, those isolated matters where you will find that 60 days was not sufficient and it has gone to in excess of that time frame. But that would be far between the cases. So generally we look to finalizing a matter within 60 business days. When a consumer approaches us, we will take the complaint at the contact center. The agent will ascertain from the consumer whether the consumer has approached the credit bureau or the credit provider first to try and resolve the matter. If it has not been an approach taken by the consumer, we would ask the consumer to please bear with us. It would be seen as a premature case at that stage. And we've actually just now recently implemented a process where we would send that premature case to the credit provider and alert them to the fact, here's a complaint from the consumer has not approached you, you now have 20 days, go and sort out the matter directly with the consumer. And if that consumer's matter is not resolved, we will then transfer that case to a formal complaint at the office on our case management system. But now on the reverse, if the if the matter has gone through to the credit provider and the consumer still remains aggrieved at the outcome, the matter will then be looked at within the contact center. We have a dedicated person that looks through the complaint after it's been logged by one of the agents. that dedicated individual will call the consumer back. Every single matter, there will be a live person speaking with the consumer, alerting them to the fact that there is a 60-day period by which we try and resolve our matters. If there are outstanding informations, then we would require those. Once that has taken place, that dedicated individual then transfers the matter to our case management team.
Okay.
Now, the case management team, when they receive the complaint, they will also do these checks. They will make certain, is a matter within the officer's jurisdiction? Has the consumer a valid complaint? Do they understand the complaint to send that complaint to the credit provider? Then we afford the credit provider 10 business days to give us at least an initial response, a preliminary response, acknowledging the complaint and telling us. If they can't give us a response on the consumer's complaint at that point, then they're awaiting feedback from a third party or collections agency and the like. Once the case management team receives the response back from the credit provider, that case manager then will assess the case. Here's the consumer's complaint. Here's the response from the credit provider. Does the credit provider's response answer the consumer's complaint? And oftentimes there'll be a backwards and forwards of communication just to understand exactly what the needs and wants of the consumer is, and then how we can tie that in to reach a resolution with the credit provider. We have had occasion where there's been a number of questions raised between the credit ombudsman office and the credit provider, because you have to challenge some of the information that's provided. Remember, again, the consumer is a lay person in most instances. The legal jargon that comes with a response from the credit provider may not necessarily be received in its simplistic form by the consumer, and that is where the intervention of the credit ombudsman becomes so instrumental. In the event that it is a matter that's simple enough to appreciate, let's use the example of a statement of account. This consumer has approached us, they've alerted the office to the fact that they've made payments, but those payments do not reflect on the consumer statement. That's a simple matter as it stands, because all that would happen is we would ask the consumer, provide us with your proof that you've made these payments on those months that you are alleging non-payments are reflecting on your statement. If the consumer cannot provide that proof, we don't leave it just there. We will inform the credit provider. The consumer has confirmed that payments have been made. For whatever reason, the proof of payment is not necessarily available. However, the consumer has alerted us to the fact that he has made payment via a debit order. So we will ask for evidence of that nature to look through it. And if the payments do reflect on the consumer's bank statement, all's well. We alert the credit provider. They will, perhaps the monies had gone into a suspense account, and for that reason the account would then be credited with any amounts that were previously not reflecting correctly. There could be a complex matter.
Yes, I was about to ask you, what is a complex matter? What's something that's complex?
So, using the same statement of account example, perhaps a consumer would approach the office and alert the office to the fact that they've been paying the account for the last few years, and notwithstanding their installments being paid per month, the balance is just not reducing. And we will look at that statement of account, but it may not be simple enough to ascertain that this was the opening, the loan amount, the principal amount. Was the initiation fees correctly calculated? Was interest calculated correctly? And there is a legal maxim in law, again, sorry about the legal wording, but there's something called the in de plume rule.
I want us to literally talk about the in de plume rule, because when I was interviewing Alf, I forgot. I remembered when I was outside, I'm like, I didn't talk about the in de plume rule, and I really want us to talk about
Consumers don't know what does an in de plume rule, but then it goes to the credit ombudsman when we assess a case and we assess that statement of account. We will look at the in de plume, but what is in de plume? In de plume basically means that at the time when you first default on your credit agreement, you cannot be charged more than double the amount as at the time of default. So let's use the example that I have a credit agreement. I've been paying. I've now stopped making payment, and the amount is 3,000 rand. Including any sort of fees or interest charges, the maximum I can be charged is 6,000 rand. Provided that no judgment has been taken. Because if judgment has been taken, then that process, there's a court order in place now, and interest would accrue based on that court order. So it's important to understand that in du plume, like I say, not many consumers would appreciate what the meaning is, but the credit ombudsman will investigate. Another example would be possibly something such as reckless credit. Consumer approaches our offices and advises that at the time that they entered into the credit agreement, they actually weren't able to afford the credit. There are certain criteria that is set out in the National Credit Act and the guidelines in terms of how credit may be extended by a credit provider. So if a consumer alleges reckless lending, we will call for the supporting documents that the credit provider had received from the consumer at the time that the credit was extended. So one of the requirements would be to request a credit report at the time that the credit was extended. Did the credit provider look at what the consumer's current outstanding debts as set out at the credit bureau reflect? Was that taken into account? Did the credit provider make certain that the consumer was familiar, was a consumer of an understanding of what was entered into? Did they appreciate? So going through looking at the assessment on affordability, was the credit provider continuing with that credit agreement, notwithstanding that there would have been a possibility that the consumer would not have been able to maintain the monthly payments going forward. So that's another type of complaint we would deal with. We deal with fraud matters. We have many instances where consumers have approached us and said, but I didn't sign up for this credit agreement, but now at the credit bureau there's a listing reflecting ABC credit providers. So we will go through the process of investigation by requesting the consumer to let us have an affidavit confirming what they allege. We would ask for supporting documents like their ID, the proof of a specimen of their signatures, things of that nature. And then we will address that with the credit provider. There have been instances where credit providers have come back to the office and confirmed that there was indeed some fraud perpetuated. And sometimes we found that it is even an agent of the credit provider. But because the agent was representing the credit provider, there's an obligation on that provider to take at least vicarious liability there.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. That's great. And one of the things that I believe consumers must be aware of is that you cannot claim that the credit provider has entered into a reckless agreement with you if you peppered your numbers and you added salt and pepper. You probably didn't qualify, but then you added 1,000 rand here to qualify, and then later on you come back and you come to the ombuds office and say, no, this is a reckless.
Very good point. Absolutely. There's a defense that a consumer may raise by saying that credit was extended to me recklessly by the credit provider. But there's equally an obligation on that consumer. Put down correct factual information. Your income should be factual. Your expenses per month should be factual. And we understand that, human behavior is such that you want the credit, you will try and tweak those numbers. But being colorful in that fashion is going to have repercussions. The chances are you may not, as a consumer, be able to maintain your monthly payments. And it's, you can't scream wealth for the wrong reason. So there is an obligation equally so on a consumer to maintain correct and accurate information.
Okay, so maybe there's just this question that I have. So, like you said, there's many credit bureaus. I mean, we know the big four that have Experian,
XDS, TransUnion.
Yeah. So let's say, for example, I'm applying for credit, and my understanding, and I'm not sure if I'm right, my understanding is that when I'm applying for credit, the credit provider will put in my details, and probably they'll connect at one of the credit bureaus, and that bureau probably doesn't have my information that was supplied by the credit providers, and then they approve my application, and then later on I cry wolf, and then when you check, when you solve the dispute, would you then go and check all four, or you just check the one?
Good question again. And so with credit providers looking to a consumer's credit profile, yes, it's a requirement in terms of the Act, in terms of assessing affordability. Obviously, the consumer must provide consent for that credit provider to access their personal information. Then, in the instance that the credit provider approaches Credit Bureau 1, that could very well be because they have an arrangement, an agreement with Credit Bureau 1. And in the event that that consumer now has a dispute and raises that dispute with the credit ombud, remember, part of the process is we would have asked the consumer, did you raise a dispute with Credit Bureau 1? And if the consumer says, yes, I did, and here's a dispute reference number, if one has been provided, then we will proceed with the investigation process. With credit information disputes, one of the first requirements of a case manager at the office is they must request credit profiles. They must go onto the portal with the credit bureaus you've mentioned and access those reports. So we would then look at all those reports, the major ones, and we will ascertain, does Credit Bureau 1 have the information, but maybe Credit Bureau 3 doesn't? And although in terms of the South African Credit and Consumer Credit and Risk Reporting Agency, there should be all information, all data should be reflecting the same at each of the credit bureau. But we know that in practice, there have been occasions where the information doesn't necessarily reflect equally the same. So that obligation is on our case managers to ascertain, is the information reflecting on all the bureau profiles? And then we will address that with the credit provider accordingly.
Okay. Yes. Wow. Now, this has been really a great conversation. I've certainly learned a lot, and I want to believe that our viewers will also learn a lot. Is there anything else in the dispute resolution that you believe we should maybe reflect onto our viewers and let them know to look out for, to avoid finding themselves in a dispute situation? Although some situations you can't get out of, they do happen.
Yes.
But is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you believe is important?
I think very importantly, consumers have a voice. The Credit Ombud, again, a reiteration, is an independent, impartial dispute resolution body. So we do not act for that consumer. We do not act for the credit provider. Our intent is to reach an amicable resolution between the two parties. But why I say the consumer has a voice is that in the event that a consumer has a concern, whether it's warranted or unwarranted, if it's something that you wish to query, raise it. If you look at your statement of account and you find that there's an additional value-added service that you did not sign up for, don't keep quiet, don't accept it. You have a voice that you can challenge that information, so raise it with the credit provider. And if that doesn't yield any response that is satisfactory, know that the Credit Ombud does offer dispute resolution services at no cost to that consumer. So we would be able to advise the consumer accordingly. And if we cannot, for any reason, as mentioned earlier on in our discussion, if we cannot deal with the dispute because it does not fall within our ambit, we will not leave that consumer in the lurch. We will advise them where the matter can be dealt with most effectively. So, apart from that, and saying to a consumer, budget, make certain that you do not take credit if it's not warranted. If you want something, save up for it. The interest and the costs that come with credit is an enormous amount, and rather keep credit for when you want to purchase a home, for example. Keep an emergency fund available for yourself. These things are paramount importance, and plan ahead. That's why that budget becomes so important. Black Friday is along the way, and we don't even want to go there. But just after Black Friday is going to be the festive season, and after the festive season, we all wiping back tears because it's back to all the expenses. It's back to school. So, as a consumer, make a concerted effort to understand that there are obligations that come with credit. And if you want to take out credit because that's the only avenue available to you, which is provided in terms of, the National Credit Act, you can be extended credit. You cannot be discriminated against it, but as an individual, make that decision wisely.
I love how the conversations, every interview, every episode I've done, budget comes in, planning comes in, saving, having an emergency fund comes in. And people don't want to hear that. They don't want to know about a budget. They know about it, but it's so difficult for them to implement it. And I keep on reiterating that until you master how to do your budget, you will find it difficult to master your finances, because that budget is able to indicate to you whether your expenses exceed your income or your income is within your expenses. So that is something that comes out, and I love it, because those are just basic financial principles that you must live by.
Add to that as a consumer in the country, you are entitled to a free credit report every 12 months. I know some of the bureaus will charge a nominal fee after you've received your first report, but you are entitled to receive that report and use that as a consumer effectively, because that talks to your credit history. You will be able to see whether all the information there accurately reflects your current credit status, and if there's something that's incorrect, that is where you need to take charge of your life.
Thank you, Avitha. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and more than anything, I learned a lot, and I think our viewers have learned a lot. I'm sure they'll be asking more about that in Duplin, and they'll go over and over this podcast just to understand what it means. And I think I loved what was important, that as a consumer, you have a voice. You have a voice, speak up. So we've reached the end of our session, and usually at the end of the session, I always ask my guests to drop a seed, to share a seed of wisdom, something that after you've said it, we can stop, and every time they think of Avitha, they think about that.
I think it's simple. Dispute resolution doesn't come at a cost. It's there, it's available, it's free of charge to that consumer. Make use of it.
There you have it. Dispute resolution is free. It's available to all of us. Let's make use of it. Let's not walk away and leave things and think, no, it's too much trouble. There are resources that are available to you that you can use, and the Credit Ombudsman is there. So thank you so much, for this conversation, and for you watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. But more importantly, I'd like to encourage you, after you've watched and you've shared with your friends, to click on the subscribe button so that you don't miss our interesting episodes. Until next time, thank you.